Welcome to this daily PBJ devotional. Read Exodus 13, Job 31, and Proverbs 6:20 through 35. This devotional is about Proverbs 6:20 through 35. My son, keep your father's commandment, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Bind them always upon your heart. Tie them around your neck. When you walk, they will guide you. When you lie down, they will watch over you. When you awake, they will speak to you. For this commandment is a lamp, this teaching is a light, and the reproofs of discipline are the way to life, to keep you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress. Do not lust in your heart for her beauty, or let her captivate you with her eyes. For the levy of the prostitute is poverty, and the adulteress preys upon your very life. Can a man embrace fire and his clothes not be burned? Can a man walk on hot coals without scorching his feet? So is he who sleeps with another man's wife. No one who touches her will go unpunished. Men do not despise the thief if he steals to satisfy his hunger. Yet, if he is caught, he must pay sevenfold. He must give up all the wealth of his house. He who commits adultery lacks judgment. Whoever does so destroys himself. Wounds and dishonor will befall him, and his reproach will never be wiped away. For jealousy enrages a husband, and he will show no mercy in the day of vengeance. He will not be appeased by any ransom or persuaded by lavish gifts. This is God's Word. Proverbs 5 was devoted entirely to warning us against the sin of adultery. Here in chapter 6, verses 20 through 35, Solomon revisited that subject. In Proverbs 5:16 through 22, Solomon advised us to protect against adultery by prioritizing and enjoying sex within your own marriage. That instruction came at the end of the teaching on adultery. Here in Proverbs 6, verses 20 through 24, his recommendation for avoiding adultery comes at the beginning of the section, not at the end as in chapter 5. In chapter 5, Solomon recommended an amorous marriage as the antidote to adultery. Here in chapter 6, as we'll see in a moment, Solomon has another defense in mind against adultery. If we read Proverbs 5:16 through 22 and chapter 6, verses 20 through 35 together, we learn that we should use multiple layers of protection against this sin. One layer is a mind that is devoted to truth and prepares for the temptation of adultery. That's chapter 6, verses 20 through 24. The other layer is a strong relationship with your spouse. That's chapter 5, verses 16 through 22. Let's focus on the layer described here in chapter 6, verses 20 through 24. Verse 24 says that it is the teaching of godly parents, according to verse 20, that will keep you from your neighbor's wife. How does that work exactly? Well, verses 25 through 29 tell us. All temptations to sin consist of lies. Just as Satan promised Eve that disobeying God's command would liberate Adam and Eve to be like God, knowing good and evil, all temptations promise some kind of benefit with no cost. Adultery, of course, promises thrills and pleasure. If you feel yourself being attracted to someone else who is not your spouse, temptation promises that the beauty of that person will be yours to enjoy, as we saw in verse 25, if you begin a relationship with her. But sin always hides the cost. And Solomon's teaching to his son in this passage is to consider the high cost of adultery. We saw that in verses 26 through 33. Sex with a prostitute is sinful, but sex with another man's wife is a much costlier sin, according to verse 26. It will bring punishment into your life, according to verse 29, just as surely as coals will burn you, as we saw in verses 27 through 28. If you learn this well while you are young, you will understand the real cost of adultery and see through the lies that temptation will tell you. Adultery is so costly because of the social shame after the sin is exposed that adulterers all bear. Some sins make sense to us, such as stealing to avoid starvation, as we saw in verse 30. Yet even that sin exacts a cost when the shoplifter is caught, according to verse 31. Our hearts go out to a starving man who steals because he's just trying to stay alive, as we saw in verse 30. So when his fine for stealing is paid, that is usually the end of the matter, according to verse 31. Adultery is not disposed of so easily. Verse 33b says, and these are the words of the NIV, his shame will never be wiped away. In other words, if you get caught committing adultery, that is going to stick with you and become a permanent part of your story. At the very least, the spouse of the person you commit adultery with will not forgive, as we saw in verses 34 through 35. In his quest to get justice, he will not hide what you did, but will spread the word so that the maximum number of people hear about it. In moments of temptation, these truths can help you find your way out of temptation without sinning. If you can remember that the promises of adultery and that adultery makes to you will prove to be false, it will be easier to say no when the temptation comes your way. So determine now to live a pure life and to remind yourself that the high cost of sin far outweighs the temporary pleasures the sin will offer you. This is the wise way to live, the pure way. May God give us grace to trust him and obey his word if any of us face this temptation in our lives. And if you found this devotional helpful, please go to my website, dailypbj.com/subscribe, and enter your email address. And then every day for free, these devotionals will show up in your inbox, and that will cue you to be in God's Word every single day. Please consider becoming part of my financial support network so I can keep making video content like this and more. Go to dailypbj.com/support if you're interested in being part of that mission. Please share this with someone who might be helped in their faith by it, and I'll see you next time. May God bless you. I hope you have a great day today.